everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, happy fall to you all, wherever you are. This is Linda from Colourwerx Designs. Carl is over at the controls, and this is... So yay, this is Fab Friday from Colourwerx Designs here at the fabulous Colourwerx Design House. Today is, if you can believe it, Friday, October 9th. This month is already screaming by. It is episode number 19 of the Fab Friday broadcast. And so here we are, we're at the Colourwerx Design House. It's a beautiful day. It's still very hot in the desert. I think it's we're going up to about 97 today. So we're under the triple digits, but I hear that we're supposed to go to triple digits later on this week. So, no, we're looking forward to fall. We need some cooler weather. The nights are cooling off a bit, but the days are still extremely hot. So let us know if we're streaming okay. Like and share this video, please, with all of your friends and family. Make sure that you subscribe to our Colourwerx YouTube channel as well so you don't miss a tutorial or if you're watching the replay of the Fab Friday broadcast. And with that, let's check in with everybody and see how everybody's doing this morning. Who's coming in, Carl? Oh, Suzanne, hello. Am I pronouncing your name right? Is it Suzanne or Suzanne? I'm not, but hello, Suzanne. So we have one of Suzanne's fabulous quilts that I hope that's okay. We're going to show it today on the show. So Suzanne did some fabulous work with our latest Feeling Groovy quilt along. And who else is checking? Pat. Hello again from Pinehurst. Dreary here, so this is my sunshine time. Oh, that's very nice, Pat. I'm happy to be your sunshine for you today. I wish it was kind of dreary here or overcast. It's just sunny here. We are going to skip the cactus cam for you cactus cam lovers out there. The golf course, it was boring before. Now it's really boring because it's closed. So there's nothing going on our golf course today except for reseeding. And right now it looks pretty dreary and brown and all that other stuff. So cactus cam is out for the next couple weeks until they open up the course again, which will be sometime in November. Who else, Carl, checking in? We got lots of people checking in. Hi, Nedra. Thank you for checking in today. Nedra from Arizona and Connie from North Carolina. And Kay from Truckee. Hello, Kay. I hope you're having a great time out there. And Janice from Ontario. Frosty this morning, but sunny. Ooh, I like that kind of weather. That sounds nice. Frosty, but sunny. And Kim says, hi, Linda and Carl. Yes. Hi, Kim. How are you? And Jen, our local mid-mod maven from Palm Springs, is checking in. So it's beautiful here in the desert. Let me see what we're going to do next. Let's see. Let's move right on to the $10 Colourwerx gift card winner from last week. As you know, we did a tutorial on applique tips and tricks. I think it was. No, it was on your portable ironing board cover, Carl. So episode 18 is all about making a portable ironing board, and it was a great little tutorial from Carl. A lot of you, we got a lot of positive comments, and we thank you for that. And with the question of the week last week for the $10 Colourwerx gift card was, what other rooms do you quilt in? And this week's winner is... Congratulations, Brenda. So we will get in touch with you either via Facebook if you're not already on our email list, or I will email you your Colourwerx $10 gift card, and it should arrive right in your email. Stay tuned for the end of this show. We'll ask another question at the end of the show that everybody answers, and all comments go in the random thingamy organizer jiggamy thing, and we select a winner for next week's Colourwerx gift card. Speaking of that, though, I need to make a very important announcement for you guys who might have us on your schedule every Friday. We are entering into 2 weeks solid of virtual teaching. So we're going to be teaching for the next 2 weeks, almost every day, workshops and lectures for various guilds throughout the country here from the Colourwerx Design House. So we're doing, we're zooming into guilds and everybody's home. So unfortunately, our Fab Friday for next week and the week after is not going to be here because we're teaching. So we're going to be returning with Fab Friday. Just make a note. Friday, October 30th, same time, right here at the Colourwerx Facebook page with a very spooky, right, Carl? Spooky trick-or-treat episode for Friday, October 30th for you all. So just make a note. We won't be here for 2 weeks. We'll remind you via Facebook posts and things like that. We are actually teaching virtual workshops and lectures. So again, if you are in a guild and you guys are looking for fall lectures or workshops via virtual, or even for the new year, please go check out our teacher page. We do virtual lectures and virtual workshops, and we would love to come visit your guild. So if your program chairs are looking for entertainment or teachers, please have them check out our workshop page. Yes, what? Oh, Julie says streaming great. That's good to know. So it's always, you know, internet gremlins and all that other stuff that goes on. It's always good to know that everything is looking good for you guys. Okay, anything else before I move on to other news? Oh, hey, Mary. Mary's checking in from Texas. That's very nice. Hello. And Teresa from Sanford, North Carolina, another customer from Lindarella Quilt Work Days. So Teresa. And Nancy from Idaho. Thank you. One more. Joy from Iowa. Wow. Thank you, everybody. This is a great, we're getting a national audience. It feels great, and we appreciate everybody checking in today. So I do want to go off to just another announcement on our sample sale when Carl brings that card up. So the sample sale is up. It's live. If you're looking for finished goods now, like finished quilts, there's a good range of table runners, some mod dogs, mini mod dogs that can be made into pillows, and some quilts there. We just simply have to clean out our samples. We have far too many samples here. We have a super busy 2021 and the end of 2020 season coming up where we're doing many more samples, and we live in a kind of a smaller house, so we just simply cannot have all these samples hanging around. And so we want to offer them to you, finished goods, that you can put your label on. You can give it to your family members if you don't have time to make a quilt, or you just simply like one of our quilts, et cetera, et cetera. There's some fall stuff up there. There's some Halloween stuff up there. And then, of course, there's just some beautiful other samples up there. And we will actually front for you. So if you put your label on it and Uncle Ed calls us up and says, did she really make that? Yes, of course she made that. Yes, absolutely. Yes, yes. So go check out the sample sale. It's on the Colourwerx.com website. The other big news is we just finished our Feelin' Groovy quilt along. This was our 5th quilt along. So if you're interested in checking out some of our other quilt alongs, you can jump into any of these quilt alongs at your own pace. Do it at your own pace. The blog posts are always up there on the website under the quilt along page. There are usually companion videos that go along that with all the blog posts. So if you're a visual learner, you can watch, you know, me visually do it, or you can read the blog post, or both. And so we just finished our 5th quilt along, which was the Feelin' Groovy quilt along. And I'm going to show now my finished Feelin' Groovy. There it is. Let me back up a bit. So I did like a baby version. So it's only like nine blocks with the paper piece border. I did most of it out of Moda Grunge there with all my black and whites going around on the border there. So you can see that this is a 40 by 40 inch quilt when it gets done. And of course it still is making noise because I still have all the paper attached right there. So guess who gets to pull all the paper off tonight? Oh, passing over to Carl. Yes, Carl likes to pull the paper off. It's his enjoyment and recreation during TV time. So he just sits there and pulls all the paper off, and it's fabulous because I don't have to do it then, and that's a good thing. So I did want to share some other people's quilts from the Feelin' Groovy quilt along, or where they are. I have a couple examples to show you. We'll probably get more in the next week. So when we come back October 30th with our spooky episode, we'll have probably some more customer quilts to share with you. But the first one I think I go to is Marilyn, if I remember right. Yes, these are Marilyn's spiky blocks. So it's a slash and sew or stack and whack for the background, and then you applique the swirls on. So that's Marilyn in progress, doing her Feelin' Groovy thing. The next one is super fabulous. Suzanne, you know this. Here it is. This is Suzanne's Feelin' Groovy quilt, all made out of Cafe. And she put it up on the Cafe Fawcett Collective group, which is a group of Cafe Fawcett lover fabrics. And it's like 40,000 people belong to this Facebook group. And
guess what?
What? What did Suzanne? Oh, I don't know. Suzanne, it's quilted and I did it yesterday. Oh, I want to see that, Suzanne. You must send me a picture. But this is a beautiful version of Feeling Groovy. And the people over at the Cave Fawcett Collective are going wild about this particular version that Suzanne did. So it's a wonderful example. But Suzanne also took the Feeling Groovy spiky border and made this cute little pumpkin table runner. So check out the pumpkins she drew out, I believe, if I'm right or wrong, let me know, Suzanne. But she drew the pumpkin shape out, so that's not our pattern. But she took the spiky outer border pattern, which is part of Feeling Groovy, and made this cute, super cute table runner for her Halloween festivities.
I guess where Susan's
coming from. Oh, I didn't know that. Wow, Susan says looking good in France. I didn't know she was coming from France. Well, hello and yes,
Bonjour.
Bonjour.
I think.
I don't know. My French is horrible. So anyway, thank you, Suzanne, for letting me share your creations with everybody. We really appreciate that. And you did a beautiful, beautiful job. The other one I want to share is from Kim, because Kim is one of our Lindarella fans. So this is the very first pattern that I actually designed for Lindarella's Quiltwerx, which was our first pattern company. And this is called Happy Jacks. And this is available on our website under the Lindarella Pattern Company. All of our Lindarella patterns are like $5 each. So, but this is just cute. Kim also did our Bat Magic, but I just love the way she decorated up. I think is at your entry hall or a corner of your room, Kim, where it just looks so cute with the little Happy Jacks wall hanging above all your Halloween stuff. I'm a big Halloween fan too, even though we don't get any trick-or-treaters out here in the desert, mainly because we're in a development, a condominium community with gates, so to speak. I think, let's see, do I have anybody else on the Feeling Groovy thing that we need to add there, Carl? No, I think that was it. So those are some of the things that are going on in the Colourwerx Quilt Along group. And that is up on Facebook if you want to join. And if Carl wants to come back to me, then we can figure out where we're going next now with this crazy broadcast that's kind of all over the place. So we will actually go right into our tutorial now, because I do want to share these tips and tricks with you. So I just have a block here. This is not my design, but this is just a free block that was up at the Robert Kaufman website, when they do free patterns. And I just use this as an example because, it's got points. It's a fairly basic block. I'll put it more in the middle there. And, I think this is the biggest frustration for all of us. We all want to do perfect piecing. We all want to do piecing where we don't cut off our points when we get the block together. We all want to make sure that the block comes out to the measurement it's supposed to be, when it's what the pattern says it's supposed to be. And it can be, needless to say, super frustrating, especially if you're a beginner quilter. I remember when I was a beginner quilter and I would struggle with my 1/4 inch seam piecing. I couldn't get it right. That's why I ended up doing applique, actually, is because I could never get my 1/4 inch piecing correct. And applique, I could just draw anything and it would be perfect. So I think we all struggle with precision piecing, especially the more units that are in a block. This is a pretty basic block. But if this were, let's say you had double the units and you had to put together 40 different little pieces, that can become pretty complicated. So I do want to talk about, there are some basics of the road. And I think part of the frustration is you go back to your quilt shop or your sewing machine dealer, and really all they do is pretty much tell you to keep practicing and take more classes and buy more presser feet and more thread. And that's not necessarily always the answer. So let's dive right into the tutorial. I have like a little slideshow, and I'm going to share 15 big tips with you about how to improve your precision piecing. And some of these are going to seem totally elementary, but it will make sense when you combine all these together. So go ahead, Carl, with the slideshow. I'll move myself. I'm right down here. See, this is a new thing from our streaming software. You can see I'm in a circle down here. Isn't this cool? We think this is pretty cool. So I like this. So I'm right down here in case you need to see me right here. Okay, 15 tips. So the first one is starch all your fabrics before you cut. So a lot of us are starching as we piece, and somehow you think that makes the block get flatter and the pieces get flatter. Don't do that, because I tell you, even if you starch, even if you use Mary Ellen's Best Press, every time you starch and then press using a hot iron, you are shrinking that unit ever so slightly, because starch is a sizing agent, and starch, and it just does exactly what the name says. It sizes the piece, so it shrinks it ever so slightly. So when you are starting to cut your quilt, let's say you have fat quarters, half yards, whatever the pieces are, starch everything first. And I like to use the, what is it? The Faultless Spray Starch, which you get at Walmart. It's like $1.99 a can. It's the gold top one, which is slightly more expensive by 30 cents than the other one, but it's great. And I'll take all my fat quarter, all my yardage, even if it's several yards, 2 yards, 3 yards, and I'll starch everything first so that it just gives the pieces more body. And then I won't do any, if I'm doing precision piecing, I won't do any more starching until the block is finished. So that's very important to remember, that starch actually shrinks your fabric. So always starch before you cut. The other one is change the blade in your rotary cutter. That makes a big difference if you don't have a super sharp blade. And also keep to the same brand rulers throughout the project, okay? So if you're going to use a Creative Grid 6x24 ruler, make sure you're using a Creative Grid square ruler. And the reason being is that if you change from Creative Grids to, let's say, OmniGrid or some other brand, Dritz or whatever, all of that that's on your ruler is printed. That's a printed material. And those measurements can also be ever so slightly off. And so if you're changing from Creative Grids to, let's say, Omni, the printed measurements can be slightly different from ruler brand to ruler brand. The other one is, and the big no-no is, don't ever use your cutting mat for measurements on precise piecing. So I see a lot of people, when I used to teach beginning quilting, they would line up their fabric up on their cutting mat, and they would, use the cutting mat to cut a 4x4 square. Don't do that, because the cutting mats can expand and contract more than anything else. Your cutting mat is made out of like a plastic, a rubber, because it's self-healing, and it's got printed measurements on it again, and it can expand and contract with the heat, the humidity, or the cold of the air. So if it's really, really cold out and your house is cold, you can have it contract or expand if you've got the heater going or it's very hot out. So don't ever use your cutting mat to do precise piecing measurements. So next slide. That's number 1 and 2. Number 3, this seems elementary. Clean and oil your machine. Make sure you're removing the stitching plate and cleaning under your machine. Because why? Because dust bunnies get up there, dust, fuzz, and all of that can affect your precision piecing and how the pieces go together. Number 4, change the stitch plate. This is very important, to a single hole stitch plate. This is all for 1/4 inch precision piecing now. Obviously, if you're appliquing, you're going to want the stitch plate that has the rectangle in the middle. The single hole stitch plate, and I've got a picture of it right up there on the screen, is sold for all machines, most all machines, at your sewing machine dealers or through Amazon or whatever. And the reason a single hole stitch plate is so important is because you have to understand that the needle goes directly down with the thread in it, and the bobbin thread loops around the needle and comes back up. When you use a rectangular stitch plate to do precision piecing, your straight stitch has more of a chance of not being a nice, clean, straight stitch. And with the single hole stitch plate, it doesn't allow the needle to move from side to side like a rectangular stitch plate does. You just get a much more perfect straight stitch when you use a single hole stitch plate, and therefore you have much more control. The other thing a single hole stitch plate does is it doesn't allow, when you're sewing triangles together or something that has a tip to it, and if anybody's ever done this, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. The tip gets eaten up down into the stitch plate, especially when you use a rectangular stitch plate. So this also, a single hole stitch plate helps or avoids your fabric from being eaten up in the stitch plate underneath when you start the stitching seam. Number 5, next slide. Start each new project with a brand new needle. It is not, I hate to inform people, it is not a badge of honor to say that you have never changed your needle at your sewing machine. It's not good if you say, oh, I haven't changed my needle in 2 years. That's really not a good thing, okay? Needles to me are expendable pieces for sewing. I buy needle packs like this all the time. I have several of them sitting around the house at any one time because I religiously change my needle every 8 hours sometimes, every new project. It makes a world of difference to have a brand new needle on your machine, especially if you're doing precision piecing. I've called out the brand I like. I like Schmett's. I use the 7511 quilting needles. They're just a nice needle. They hold your 50 weight thread great. And they have a really super sharp point, which makes a difference when you're doing precision piecing. And the picture I have below here on the slide is this is what a needle looks like after several hours of stitching with it. So probably 16, 24 hours, that would be like, over a week of stitching, the point starts to get duller and duller and duller. And especially if you use batiks. Batiks have a waxy-like nature. So you might have to change your needle a couple times during the course of making a batik project because that wax is going to dull out the point of the needle. Now, if you ever hit a pin, that last photo right there on the bottom, that last photo is what the tip of your needle looks like magnified 100 times when it hits the pin. So it's even if your machine seems to be stitching great and you don't think there's a problem, probably when you hit the pin, there is a problem. And again, this will affect how you get that 1/4 inch seam. All of these things start to compound themselves when you do precision piecing. So if you're slightly off with your cutting, if your needle hasn't been changed, if you've got dust bunnies, and then if we go to the next slide, this will start to make more sense. All of this starts to compound as you put your block together. So change your presser foot to a 1/4 inch patchwork presser foot. Okay, a lot of people have the presser foot that has the guide on it. I'm going to tell you, I'm not a big fan. It works for some machines, but I am not a big fan of the guide, and I'll tell you why. Because a lot of times people shove their fabric right up against that guide, and what happens is the fabric curls under or up, and you're actually sewing a larger 1/4 inch seam. And remember, as we're putting precision piecing together, when they tell you to do a 1/4 inch seam, especially if you've got a block with lots of points and you don't want to cut off your points and all those things, you're going to be doing what's known as a scant 1/4 inch seam. A scant 1/4 inch seam is like a hair less than a full 1/4 inch seam. It's like one thread less. And so you have to be very wary of that. It doesn't mean it's an 1/8 of an inch seam. It just means it's a scant 1/4 inch seam, which means it's a hair less. So when you use the guide, you have to be very wary that you're not shoving your fabric edge right up on that guide because 10 to 1, you're probably curling up or under, right? And you're taking a bigger 1/4 inch seam. So I prefer to use the 1/4 inch presser foot without the guide. That's just my preference on my Bernina. And then change your thread to a 50 weight 2-ply if you can. So you know it's a 2-ply because when you look at your thread cap, it usually has a number on it that goes 50/2 or 50 and then /2 or 50/3. That last number tells you how many plies get wound together to make the thread. So if it says 2, that's 2-ply. If it says 3, it means 3-ply. And basically, 3-ply is thicker than 2-ply. So why I like the Aurifil thread that I've called out here is because it's 2-ply. It's a finer thread too. It's been gassed, and we could do a whole lecture on what all that means. But gassing a thread means that it has gone through a high heat process, and actually it's removed the fibers off that thread, which makes it a finer thread. It doesn't mean that it's not strong. It means it's finer. And all of these things start to compound, like I said, and all of these things start to take up space in that precious, scant 1/4 inch seam allowance. So if you're using a 40 weight thread, which is a much thicker thread than a 50 weight, or you forgot to change your thread and you still got that 12 weight thread on, which is really thick, you're taking up a lot of precious seam allowance. So that's why it's very important to change your thread to a 50 weight, try to find a 2-ply. You could use a 60 weight, which is even finer than the 50 weight, and I think YLI makes a 60 weight thread. But when you go up in numbers like 60 weight, you probably don't want to go any higher than 60 weight, which would be thinner and finer thread. It's not necessarily less strong, but it takes up less space in your seam allowance. But when you get there, you need to reduce your stitch length because the breakage can happen a little bit more often. So that's why I like the Aurifil. And I actually like to use a neutral colored thread. It doesn't matter what I'm piecing, it doesn't matter what the color is. I will use this gray. I just like this silvery gray. It's number 2615, and it just seems to just completely disappear in all the seam allowances. So check your thread, check the numbers on your spool. That's going to give you a clue to what you're looking at. So if it says 50/2, that means it's a 50 weight thread, it's 2-ply. If it says 40/2, that means it's a 40 weight thread. So that's how you read your spools, basically. Going next slide. So another tip, number 8, test your 1/4 inch seam, meaning you want to do a scant 1/4 inch seam. And a lot of times, like I said, we just take for granted, we've put in our 1/4 inch presser foot, there we go. You know, you get lazy sometimes, I do it, where you just aren't really watching where you're placing the edge of the fabric. And so if you're trying to be precise with your piecing and you want that block to work out to the size it needs to work out, and you don't want to cut off your points, test your 1/4 inch seam allowance. And this is the surefire way to do it. So you just cut two 2-inch wide strips. They can be like 12 inches long out of scraps. Do your best 1/4 inch seam, putting them right sides together, press that seam to one side, and now measure at the top, middle, and bottom of that strip set. It should measure 3.5 inches because you've taken a 1/4 inch off each side for the 1/4 inch seam allowance. If it's measuring slightly under 3.5 inches, then you know that you need to be more scant with your 1/4 inch seam allowance. And if we go to the next slide, so you might find after going through a couple tests, you might discover that really you're not putting the edge of your fabric strips on the edge of the presser foot. You're actually putting the edge of your fabric slightly under or under the inside of your presser foot. It's going to look a little odd, but this is going to be more precise to you. And what you can do is actually take some masking tape. Some people use the Dr. Scholl's, what is that stuff, Carl, that goes in your
bunion things.
Bunion things. You'll see it at the Walmart or in the Walgreens. And it has, it's like a moleskin and it's thick. Or they make several notions at your quilt shop, and you can use a strip of that across your machine so that you have something that's raised. Several layers of tape will do this, or they have the guides at the quilting shop so you can have a guide to put your edge, your fabric edge onto, so you're always remaining scant, or you can mark your machine or things like that. But don't be surprised if your scant 1/4 inch actually is not on the edge of the presser foot, is my point. Now, if you're still having problems, this is a great gadget. If we go to the next slide, called the Perkins, I always have to look at the screen, Perkins Perfect Piecing Seam Guide, okay? This is a little gadget that we used to sell oodles of these at the quilt shop when we owned it. It's the greatest little gadget to get your 1/4 inch seam perfect. Okay, you can see it's a little tiny ruler. It's about a $5 notion at your quilt shop or on Amazon or wherever you shop. It has a line at the bottom. Do you see that little line at the bottom that goes across? And then in the middle of the ruler, there's a little hole. And that's a little hole that's drilled through the ruler. And what you do is you put your needle down in that hole and you put the ruler, if you look on that picture to the right, you put the ruler over with the ruler side off to the left. So you're lining your presser foot up along the middle of the presser foot along the line, and you've got your needle down in the hole, and this tells you exactly where you need to place your fabric to get the perfect scant 1/4 inch. And so what you do is you put that in your machine, put your presser foot down, grab some moleskin, grab a couple layers of masking tape, or grab some of the guides, the self-adhesive guides they sell at the quilt shop, and put that down, and then you mark your machine, go back to cut your two 2-inch strips again, test it, and see what you get. And this little guide really helps people, especially if you have older machines, featherweights, things like that, or you're struggling to get your 1/4 inch and you just don't know what's going wrong. This helps you get your scant 1/4 inch because it is a scant 1/4 inch. Okay, number 9, here we go. I hope this is helping everybody. Let us know in the comments if you have questions or anything. We'll get back to them right after the tutorial. Number 9, use a leader piece. Okay, this is just a scrap piece of fabric. Use a leader piece when you stop and start your precision piecing, because what happens is when you just put two strips together and you start to piece, inevitably what happens is the feed dogs grab the fabric right away, which jiggers off your 1/4 inch. If you've ever done piecing and you want to know why your seam looks odd at the beginning or the end, it might look thicker, it might look thinner, and then you get your sewing mojo going during the middle of the strip, and then it kind of wavers off at the end. It's because those feed dogs are grabbing, and when the fabric is first starting out, it grabs the fabric. So by using a leader piece, one, it's grabbing the leader piece first. So the feed dogs are grabbing the leader piece first, which allows you then to line up your strips correctly and get a much more accurate seam allowance at the beginning and ending of whatever units you're putting together. When you're strip piecing, it's not that big of a deal. You've got a 40-inch long piece of strip. But when you're putting, like, let's say a 4-patch together and maybe it's 1 by 1 square, let's say you're doing miniatures, the leader piece really, really helps. Because again, those feed dogs are very strong and they're going to grab whatever the fabric is right away. This also helps with thread nest. You won't get any thread nests with a leader piece. Number 10, I like this one. Pinning is a personal preference. So I pin at seams sometimes, but know that if you pin a lot and you leave those pins in as you sew, again, that's taking up precious seam allowance. And lo and behold, if you sew over those pins, your seam allowance becomes slightly larger in those areas. And this is especially true when we're trying to nest our seams and you leave the pin in as you're nesting. It is very important, not only for your needle, but also that you, for your seam allowance, that you remove the pin as you approach the seam. So next one, 11, nesting the seams before stitching. You need to nest the seams. So we've all heard this, that you press one side and press the other side. The idea is to make, and I'll show this one up here, this block as flat as possible. This is the back of the block, and I'll show it in a minute too when we get out of this tutorial. So you want to try to make your seams go in opposite directions. You can even open your seams. A long time ago that was a no-no, but you can open your seams, and I'll tell you why in a minute. But nesting your seams is important, and like everything, there are some nested seams that just don't want to go together. They just don't. They just have a problem, and they're just not going to behave. And you can pin and pin and pin, and it still won't go. So one of the tricks that I do is when I get a seam like that, I usually try it once, twice, third time, no way. I'm not gonna deal with this seam anymore, not being so stubborn. I put a dab of glue there, and I might pin it again, or I do a tack stitch. So especially when you're putting lots of blocks together to make a row of quilts, and you need those intersections every 12 inches to match, I tack stitch across those intersections before I sew down the entire line or sew down the entire side to put the 2 rows together. And what I mean by tack stitches, it's like basting at the intersections, but I don't change my stitch length. I just go to each intersection, it's been pinned, the seams are nesting, they're going in opposite directions, and I might just stitch a couple stitches right across the intersection and then cut my threads, go to the next intersection, sew a couple stitches, and then sew a couple stitches. And that way I can check those intersections before I've sewn the entire row together. So if an intersection is not perfectly matched, I can just go ahead and seam rip only 3 or 4 stitches and then go back and then tack stitch it again. So I hope that makes sense. It's just something, a little trick of mine. If you've ever taken a beginning quilting class, you'll know that's what we do. But that's just another trick. Or you can do a little dab of glue there and then go back and pin. What happens is when you're sewing blocks together and then the rows together and you need those intersections to match, as you start at the beginning, everything works out great. But again, because the feed dogs are so strong, you're going to find that, and if you're a seamstress, you know this, when you have to ease something in, you're going to find that the bottom fabric moves at a slightly faster rate. And I mean, it's not to the eye, but it just happens. You won't be able to see it moving, but the feed dogs are so strong that it's moving that bottom fabric slightly faster than the top fabric. And so you can pin all the way down a row and make sure every seam is perfectly nested. And you might find at the very end that the last couple intersections have come off kilter, off middle. They're not off. They're not nested anymore. And even though you pinned, and that's because of those feed dogs being so strong. So that's why I go back and I kind of tack stitch at each intersection. That way I can just go in and I know that each intersection is perfectly matched before I sew down my final stitch down the entire row. Number 12, very important. Always use a dry iron. If you use steam, and I do use steam, but if you use a lot of steam, when you're trying to do precision piecing, again, you're going to find that your block has stretched or gets shorter or something odd is happening. So try not to use a lot of steam. If you do need a stubborn steam and it needs to go flat, give it a little spray of water maybe across it or something like that. That works great. And then also set your seam. So if you've never heard this, this is when you stitch, let's say, two strips together, before you press to one direction and open the strips up, keep them folded like how they went into the machine. Take it over to your iron and just press the seam that you've just sewn right across the seam you've sewn. That squeezes and squishes. Again, we're trying to make the seam allowance as perfect as possible, and we don't want anything to take up other seam allowance that's not supposed to be in there. So that squeezes your thread down in the seam allowance. It flattens that seam, and then when you press the seam to one side, you'll find that you get a crisper seam. So it's called setting the seam when you do that. Also at the bottom there, I said pressing seams open is okay. There was a long time ago, before fabric became so well made. Now our fabric, the weft and the weave and the thread count is so much better than it was in the 70s, when people were quilting and they said, don't press your seams open. The reason they said don't press your seams open is because what was happening long ago, and anybody who's been quilting a long time would remember this, if you pressed your seams open and you didn't use a tight enough stitch, especially if you were hand piecing, which a lot of people were doing, they were hand piecing the stitch or the rows together, the batting would then fluff up over time through that seam, and you would start to see this what do you call it? Fluff of the batting coming through over time from a quilt. That doesn't really happen anymore. A lot of times, I can't say that a lot of people hand piece anymore. They do, I think, but there's not a lot of us that hand piece. So you usually do all your piecing by machine, and the weave and the thread count of the fabric has become so good now and tighter now, especially if you're using batiks, that even if you press the entire quilt with all seams open, you're not going to get a lot of that batting fluff coming up over the life of the quilt. So that was one of the things about why pressing your seams open was not okay, and now it is okay. So next, we're almost there. 13, when you seam rip, this seems elementary, make sure that you remove all of the thread bits. And I do this all the time. I'll seam rip and I leave all those thread bits in there because I'm so lazy. I don't want to, or Carl will. And I don't, well, no, Carl's very good at removing all the thread bits. I must say that. I'm not. I want to get back. I'm impatient. I'm like the most impatient quilter in the world. So I seam rip, and then I go stick it back on the machine, and it still doesn't work out. Well, why? Because thread bits are left in the seam allowance, and again, that's taking up seam allowance. So it seems like an elementary tip, but it does make the difference. 14, here's another one, a tip. If you accidentally, and we've all done this, you're seam ripping along and you rip through the fabric by accident at the seam allowance. You were meant to take a stitch out, and your seam ripper slipped, and you hear that horrible that means you've ripped through the fabric. Don't go back and sew over that intersection, that rip 3,000 times like you're darning a sock. It's never going to work. It doesn't look good. It doesn't help you. What I do is I take a little piece of fusible stabilizer, and I prefer the Pellon Shape Flex. This is what I use for pillows and cuffs, collars. I use it for body behind fabrics when you're making bags. It's called SF101. It's available at all your quilt shops, Walmart, Joann's, all that stuff. Pellon Shape Flex. Just go pick up a yard. I usually cut up a strip, and I'll cut it into 1-inch squares if I'm doing a quilt that has a lot of precision piecing, so I'm ready to go, because inevitably I'm always ripping through the fabric when I'm seam ripping something. And you just go ahead, and you can see it right there in the photo. You just go ahead and iron on the little Shape Flex like a Band-Aid over that rip. And then you would just go back and sew the seam again. It works like a dream. It just band-aids up there on the rip. You might have to just slightly take ever so slightly larger seam allowance in that area just to cover the hole, but using the stabilizer there just makes everything work much better, and you're not having to go back 3,000 times. We've all done it where you stitch and go back and stitch and go back just to try to cover the hole, and it never quite looks right. And of course, over the life of the quilt, that hole will probably come out again. The rip, meaning where that is. So that's just a little tip of mine of how to repair something when you've ripped the fabric during seam ripping, during precision piecing. Last tip, this is from the great Harriet Hargrave, who was one of the modern mothers of quilting in the quilting revival in the 70s. And so this is, take note of the lighting in your room. This is not my sewing room. I actually went and found this picture up on the internet. So this is somebody else's beautiful sewing studio. But what I liked about this photo is it shows that big bright window back there, and she's got two machines. One with the one if you were sitting at it, your back would be to the window. One on the other side of the table. You can see if she was sitting at it, she would have light streaming in across her sewing space. This is very important, and it was really important when we lived in North Carolina, and even now in the desert where the sun and the light is so different than other things. So you have to take note of where the light is in your sewing room and what it is doing during the day. So for instance, if you start piecing your blocks together in the morning, it's super bright. Your eyes are rested. You're doing great. And you might take a break and come back after lunch and it all goes haywire. Well, there's a couple reasons. One, maybe your eyes are tired, but two, maybe the light has shifted in your sewing room and you're actually at your machine and you're seeing things completely different than they were in the morning. You might have a shadow casting across your sewing space at that point, your presser foot. The presser foot itself might have, because of how the sun is changing during the day or the light is coming into your sewing room, you might have the presser foot might be casting the shadow across the strip or across the machine bed, across the stitching plate, which then causes you to place the fabric in a different place. If anybody remembers Lindarella's, I used to always say I had sundowners effect all the time because lo and behold, in my sewing room back in North Carolina, I could sew perfectly all day long. And for some reason, I'd get to the hour of, what was it, Carl? Like 4 o'clock, 4:30, and everything would just go down the drain. And of course, it would be the last block I was making for the day, the last stitch that I had to take in a quilt to finish it. And I don't know what it was about that hour. It was the witching hour. 4 to 6 in the sewing room in North Carolina. I just had to tell myself, give it up. Walk out of the room, come back tomorrow, because no matter what I did, the light in the room had changed. Something was going on, but I could not for the life of me piece anything between the hours of like 4:30 and 6 o'clock in my sewing room. I couldn't even applique. So there was something strange going on in the light. So this is just another important kind of tip to keep in mind that this will affect your precision piecing as well. And so with that, I want to open it up. If you guys have any questions or comments, I would love to hear it. I would love to hear if you have a tip that has worked for you over the years for precision piecing. It can be the most, I think, it's the most frustrating thing in the world to set out to do a pattern. You just want to do a simple block, maybe like this, and then all of a sudden, you can't get your 1/4 inch seam, your points are cut off, this block is not measuring out to the size it's supposed to be. And I might add too, one of the other things, I'm a big checker. So like the quilt that's behind me, and what I mean by this is all half square triangles. I don't really leave anything to chance anymore. And I learned this from my friend Dawn, who used to do samples for us at Lindarella's. And Dawn's out there. Hello, Dawn. She's moved to Texas, I think. But Dawn used to do some of the samples, and she taught me a great deal about precision piecing because she was a wonderful piecer. And I don't leave anything to chance. So this is all half square triangles. So this quilt is simply made by making the half square triangle blocks slightly larger and squaring and trimming them all down to size. Is it a lot of work? Yes. But at the end of the day, I know that every single one of these blocks back here are 4.5 inches by 4.5 inches, totally exact on. No, it's not 4 1/4, 4 1/4. It's 4.5 by 4.5 because I trimmed every single one of them down to that, or Carl did. Right?
I did, yes.
Right. So I don't leave anything to chance. So then I can put them together. And then once I put one row together, I go and measure that row. And that row had better measure what it was supposed to measure. Now, if I put the next row together, I measure that row. And then I might not measure this, the third or fourth row, but I keep measuring every now and then to make sure the quilt is going together. And that's the same to be true if you're making like a block like this. Don't take for granted that your half square triangles are going to be exactly the size that they're supposed to be. Go measure them, find out where the mistakes are happening as you make the block so that you can correct them. When you sew, like this one, what is this, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 blocks together, even though it's very simple, in a row, like the first row, go measure that and make sure that your 1/4 inch seam is what it's supposed to be and according to the pattern. So it's good to double check yourself as you make the block or the quilt. And again, it's just sheer mathematics. You know, every time you take a 1/4 inch seam, you're taking a 1/4 inch off either side. So that's why when you start with two 2-inch strips, when you sew those together, you're going to end up with not 4 inches, but 3.5 inches if you're right on. So any more questions? Let's see.
A little housekeeping.
Let's. Oh, Suzanne. I am from Vermont, but found a wonderful French guy, and wow, that sounds very romantic. Ooh, I would love to hear more about that, Suzanne. Woo,
okay,
that sounds like, ooh, l'amour, ooh, you know.
All right, let's go.
Jennifer June, what's she saying? What's up? I am actually paying attention. Yay. Well, hi, Jennifer. I hope everything's okay with you. Jennifer's another customer from North Carolina. And Terry, what great tips. My tips on my own blog. Oh, it always goes away. Carl's got to fix it. It always goes away before I can read it.
Do it again.
Get sucked in. Now I'm online with a single hole to my faff. Yes. Okay. What?
Hi.
Oh.
Hi, Terry.
I can't read that. Okay, I get what she's saying. So she's saying that she just got the single hole stitch plate. Is that right, Terry, for your faff? And it's very important. The single hole stitch plate makes a world of difference on precision piecing too. Pat, well, who else? Pat Stack, what weight do you use in your bobbin? Good question. 50 weight. I use exactly the same weight thread. Now, you can, so this is a tip from Dawn, who used to do all the samples at Lindarella's, who was a marvelous piecer. Dawn used to use, I believe, 60 weight in her bobbin. And sometimes she would piece with 60 weight at the top as well. And we used to carry in the Lindarella shop a YLI thread that was a 60 weight. It was sold for bobbin thread. It was a 60 weight bobbin thread. And I don't know if they still make it anymore, but it was a great, if you do miniatures, like miniature quilts or small, tiny blocks, this was a great piecing thread for that purpose. It was YLI, like 60 weight bobbin thread, and it came in 3 colors, I believe, gray, tan, and white. So anybody else? Jennifer June, number 9 is vital. Use a leader piece. Yes, Jen, it is. It's totally vital because, again, those feed dogs are very strong and they grab that fabric right as you start, and that's why your seam allowance goes off at the beginning and the end usually. So Kelly says, love the seam intersection. Yes, try it. It works. You know, it can be really frustrating too, especially if you're doing a king size quilt or a queen size quilt, and it's block upon block of intersections that have to match as you go down the block. So for instance, if you've ever done one of Jaybird's quilts, which is, they're fabulous quilt designs, but they have lots of triangles and other trapezoids, and then all these little intersections have to match to make other secondary patterns. The kind of tack stitching at each intersection before you sew down the whole row really, really, really helps. So that it's a great tip. Tack stitch by machine or hand. I do it by machine. So I don't change my stitch length. I just go and I pin at every intersection, and then I go over to my machine and I just simply sew right across the intersection, just 3 or 4 stitches. And I don't backstitch, I just go across the intersection about a 1/2 inch maybe, removing the pins, and that way I can check to make sure my seams are nested. And then if they aren't, if they're not perfectly matched, I can just seam rip those couple stitches right there. I don't have to seam rip across the whole row. So I do it by machine. You can certainly do it by hand if you want to, but I'm not a hand sewer. I'm a machine person. So
Nedra likes tip 15.
What's tip 15? Lighting.
Lighting.
That was from, thank you, Nedra. Yes, the lighting in your room makes a big difference. And I'm not talking about lighting. I'm talking about if you have natural light coming into your room and you've set your machine up right at that window, or for instance, in my sewing machine room, the window is off to the right, but the sun is moving from in the morning, it's over here right at the window, and it's moving across the house. In the afternoon, this is in shadow, and that makes a huge difference when you're seeing what's on your machine correctly. Trudy, Carl is your, yes, Carl is the trimming elf. He is. He likes to trim and square down. He also sews, so he does his share of piecing, and he also does all the paper ripping. So he likes to rip away all the stabilizer. He likes to, oh, I think, has he started this already? What? Oh my goodness. Look, see, ripping paper. So Carl loves to rip paper. Yes, he loves to rip paper and loves to rip the stabilizer off for the applique when we do applique stitching. Marianne Williams, just starting off with quilting. Glad I found your information. Yes, yes. Congratulations, Mary. Well, good. Quilting is really fun, but yes, 1/4 inch piecing is frustrating sometimes. So hopefully these tips help you. Anybody else, Carl, before we move?
Mary again.
Had never heard of the single hole stitch plate. Now I know. Yes, it is essential. Single hole stitch plate is essential for doing. It also makes a much more perfect straight stitch, which is what its real purpose is. And so if someday we could do a lecture on the way your stitch is formed in your sewing machine, but just really quickly, as the needle goes down, if you used your regular stitch plate, which has a rectangle in the middle, which is important for applique stitching because or decorative stitching because you're doing a zigzag. But what happens is if you use that regular stitch plate for precision piecing, your needle has play in it and it can move from right to left ever so slightly. So for instance, that's why if you're not getting a nice, perfect formed straight stitch, you can solve that problem pretty much by changing your needle and putting a single hole stitch plate in, because that hole doesn't allow the needle to move from right to left, if that makes sense.
Connie wants to know.
When you tack by machine at intersections, are you cutting thread after each intersection? Yes, I am. Yes, I am. That's why having a thread cutter on your machine is really, really great for that purpose. Because you just put your quilt in at the intersection, you stitch, stitch, stitch right across the intersection, cut the thread, move to the next intersection, stitch, 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 hit the thread cutter on your machine, and then you can just double check to make sure those intersections are all matched. So, Teresa, can't wait to piece with single hole stitch plate. Never knew that. Wow. See, I always thought everybody knew about a single hole stitch plate, but I guess not. That I found that a long time ago. And then Dawn, of course, my super piecer at Lindarella's, told everybody about it too. So, and
Yes,
Carl, Carl, too funny. Yes. Yes, he is too funny. He doesn't ever want to come on camera. We only see the hand.
It's time for the question of the week.
Is it? Okay. Yes. So the question of the week, remember, we're not going to be back until October 30th. I'm going to miss you all terribly, but we do have to honor some of our other contracts here, and we're going to be teaching virtually, which is going to be fun. So it's going to be great. We're teaching virtually for 3 guilds over the next 2 weeks, so that'll be great. So the question of the week, so that we can get on to the $10 Colourwerx gift card, is, what's your favorite thread to piece with? Of course, I said mine was Aurifil 50 weight, number 2615. You don't have to give me the color. You could actually just say, I like gray, I like tan. I just like a neutral color. But what is your favorite thread to piece with currently? And if you don't have one, you can say, I don't have one yet, So that is for the $10 Colourwerx gift card. Remember, we'll be back Friday, October 30th with a spooky, are you throwing, more paper coming at me, with a spooky, spooky episode for you all. Please like and share this video. Make sure, oh my God, he's very busy.
I gotta get
He's decided he's gonna take all the paper piecing off now. Completely. So he's getting started right away. So that's a good thing. We won't disturb him. So yes, we'll be back Friday, October 30th, same time, right here at the Colourwerx Facebook page for you guys for a trick-or-treat spooky show on Friday, October 30th. I want to wish you all a happy day out there, a happy fall. It is beautiful, and make every day a happy, coloricious day in your sewing room. It's very, sometimes it can be very challenging to do so. Alex Anderson had a great line once where she said she walked into her sewing room, and if she didn't feel like the vibes were going well in the first 30 minutes, guess what? She walked out of her sewing room. And sometimes that's a great piece of advice. There's nothing worse than forcing yourself to do something when the quilting gods are not aligned with you. So make every day a happy day and a coloricious day in your sewing room, because this is a happy hobby to have. And we really appreciate everybody being here so much. And pass this tutorial on to your friends and share it with everybody. And we will see you October 30th. Bye-bye, everybody. Thank you for tuning in.